Hey everybody, here are the notes on chapters 9 and 10. So chapters 9 and 10 are fundamentally about writing reports, which I guess, as you probably know, is different than writing emails, letters, things like that. We really want to change our focus now to writing and presenting reports for people like management or bosses or stakeholders in the company, shareholders, things like that. So I kind of want you to understand the difference between writing using lots of text and presenting a report where there's a mixture of text and data, graphs, charts, tables, things like that, and when to use those types of things and how to find the sources and how to deliver a really great presentation or a great report for whoever's asking you and one that will accomplish the goal that they've set out for you. So chapter 9 is really just about defining reports and finding source material and things like that. So obviously in your job, reports are pretty important because it's a way of outsourcing work. Your boss, your management, your company can't find the time to research every facet of everything they want to know about. So they come to you, the employee, and say, hey, we need you to look into this and we need you to come back with some data. And usually that data, that report is used to make a decision. So there is some pressure on you to do a pretty good job, to sort that information, to digest it, and to present it in a viable way that they can and look at in a timely manner as opposed to doing all of the legwork themselves. So the two types of reports are situational reports and ongoing reports. Ongoing reports are like the weekly, payroll report, expense report, things like that, or monthly or bi-monthly. Situational reports are the ones that I'm basically teaching and talking to you about, where someone comes to you on a one-time basis. Look, I need you to report on this thing, this idea, and you go out, you do your research, you come back and report, and then you might not ever do that again. Those are the tough ones, and those are the ones that are important and that are used to make decisions for the most part. So obviously you want your report to be supported and well argued and well organized, useful, all those things, and so we need to find out how to do that. And the number one reason that reports usually fail is because of the poor quality of information. So getting good information into your report is the first step, and where you get that information is the foundation for that step. So you have to find sources that are useful and worthwhile and credible. So in the notes, you'll see that there are two types of sources. One is a primary source and one is a secondary source. The primary data is data, source material that is created or collected by you. This is where you go out and you conduct interviews, you give out surveys, you actually do the legwork yourself through questionnaire and things like that, where you're creating the venue or the source of information. That's primary data, and it's very useful. But chances are someone else has probably already done that work for you. And so most of the sources you're going to use are going to be secondary sources, because those are the sources where the information's already been collected by someone else for some other purpose. It could be a book, magazine article, newspaper, another report, legal records, legal documents, stuff you find online, scholarly articles, journals, databases, websites, you name it. So I usually try to start with secondary data because it's useful, and if you can't find what you need, then you split off and you might have to create your own data, and then you have to analyze results and trend them and do all those types of things with primary data, which, a lot of that, like I said, a lot of that work's done for you with secondary data. However, at least in my teaching, in my experience, people always say, I don't know where to go for information, I don't know what to do as far as sources, where do I get these things? And so finding the sources can sometimes be tough, because once you get to college, as you know, and the further you go, the more narrow your search is. You're not just summarizing a topic anymore, you actually are trying to make an argument or do something specific. So finding sources that match up exactly with what you want can sometimes be a bit arduous. So most of the time we go to Google, we go and we type in what we want and we expect to get 10 million results back. And so it's a great place to start, but it's not always narrow or credible or viable in a way that it's going to be helpful to you, and so you need to focus it down. Plus anything you find on the internet is, subject to change and stuff like that, and it might not be credible. Anybody can have a website or post or whatever, and so you got to be careful that what you find on Google is not trash. So in short, what you have to do is, whether you start with Google or even some databases or the internet at large, you have to evaluate the sources that you find. And this is, of course, talking about secondary sources, because primary, you're the data source, and I think you can trust yourself. So the way I see it, there are 5 major categories for evaluating your sources. And so this is probably the most important part of the lecture. And there's an acronym I use. It's called CARDS, C-A-R-D-S, like playing cards. The C stands for credibility. The A stands for accuracy, the R stands for relevance, the D stands for date, and the S stands for scope and purpose. So again, that's credibility, accuracy, relevance, date, scope, and purpose. And so when you look at a source, you should go through each of the cards, metaphorically, and ask yourself those questions about your source. So you look at your source and you say, is this source credible? What do I know about the author? So for instance, if you were looking up medical research, and I had written the article, it would not be credible because you wouldn't trust me as an English major to do surgery on you. But if it was written by a medical doctor, it would be more credible. So what do you know about the author? What do you know about the organization? Is it nonprofit? Is it bias? Especially political research, you're going to want to know, are these people telling the truth? And so credibility is a big part of that. So you need to kind of do a background check or a link check, see what you can find out about the person who wrote it. Second is accuracy, and accuracy is kind of hard to depict or detect in a source because all numbers and data look pretty accurate, black and white on paper. So what you need to do is check that source that you have against other similar sources and find out if they corroborate in any way. So for instance, I make my English students at the high school do a career research paper. Johnny comes to me and said, I found 4 sources about being a motorcycle mechanic. 3 of the sources said that motorcycle mechanics make $35,000 a year, and the 4th one said they make $250,000 a year. And I said, well, you have to be able to tell which ones you think are most accurate. So if 3 say one thing and 1 says the other, what do you think? And so basically, checking accuracy is a bit of cross-referencing your data. The third one, R, is relevance. I think a lot of people find a lot of great source material, but it's not exactly what they're looking for. So if you find a source that's got tons of great information, but it doesn't answer your research question, it's not relevant to your topic, you might want to scrap it in favor of a source that answers your question or questions particularly. The D is for date, and especially in business and in medicine and things like that, the date is very important. For English, if I'm researching Shakespeare, it doesn't really matter when it was written because the information doesn't change. But in business with inflation and currency and new technologies, the date of a source is really important. And so I usually tell people 10 years is stretching. If your source is more than 10 years old, it's probably getting outdated, especially in business. So the newer your information, the better your information. And the last one is scope and purpose. And basically that is the breadth or narrowness of your source that you're looking at. And this is kind of hard to explain, but again, it's kind of like relevance. Is it answering the question that you're asking? Is your source very broad on a topic or much too narrow on a topic? And so you kind of have to gauge that for yourself. And what I mean by broad is maybe you're researching something in the business world about a certain company's financial aspects, and you find an article about the company's history as a whole. That's probably too narrow because that's just like a general overview. Maybe you find another article that's just about one product they sell. That'd be too narrow. You need something kind of in the middle that answers the question and has the appropriate scope. So I'm not sure if that's a good example, but hopefully you kind of know what I mean. But breadth or narrowness is important. So just some questions. Does the author have any credibility, or do they know what they're talking about? Does it correspond to other sources? Is it relevant? Is it recent? And does it answer the questions that you're actually trying to have answered? And there's a couple figures, 7 and 8, on page 292 and 293 that kind of speak to those ideas. So sources you can trust that you don't have to really dig into, that you can kind of trust on a surface level. Of course, databases, which you have readily accessible to you through Northwoods Library. And when I say databases, I mean the peer-reviewed scholarly ones full of scholarly articles or professional articles. Peer-reviewed research, so if you find something that's been peer-reviewed by a panel of experts, usually books are pretty solid, like those things that we find in libraries that are usually dusty, we don't touch very much anymore. It's very rare, even when I do my own research, that I go in a library and find old books. Of course, everything's been electronically condensed into zip files, so we can get everything on the internet, which isn't bad, but even online books are trustworthy. And then news articles and videos are usually pretty trustworthy. You have to be careful, like obviously we know Fox and CNN and all these different news agencies have kind of different agendas, so just be careful of bias there. Poor sources, advertisements or advertised sites, the ones that pop up on Google, like the top 3 as promoted, those are usually no good. All forms of social media are pretty evil. If you read it on Twitter, 9 times out of 10, it's probably not going to be very reliable. Unless it's maybe like a business Twitter. So that's becoming a little bit more reliable, but you have to be very careful of social media because that's kind of a death trap. Wikipedia or anything that's wiki in front of it, because that's like user edited, I can go and change anything I want on Wikipedia, so the information's subject to scrutiny. Blogs, personal web pages, ask.com, ehow, about.com, Ask Jeeves, any of those things that give you quick answers that are put up by regular people posting from their mother's basement, those are sketchy. Pages with extreme bias, if you're researching race relations and you're on the Aryan Nations page, it's probably not going to be a good fit. You want to get something that's kind of a neutral feel to it. So that's secondary sources, and I think that you guys have probably done enough research in your lifetimes to kind of know what's believable and what's malarkey out there. So try to find some sources that you can trust, because that's really the first step in gathering your information so that you can create a report that people are going to believe and trust. You're only as good as your information, and you're only as good as your sources. If you come up with a bunch of really terrible sources, people aren't going to believe you. I'm kind of running out of time in this YouTube video, so I'll end it there, and then I'll post part 2 here shortly. So thanks for watching.